Thank you, David. I'll be reading from the New International Version, Exodus chapters, starting with Exodus 12, verses 1 through 13. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roasted over a fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." And from chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." Then Moses said to the people, "Commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of Abib, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere in your borders. On that day tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt."
Over the weekend, my mom was went up from Virginia to Pennsylvania to be with Grandpa, and decided to go through a bunch of his stuff and try to consolidate. And so we were getting these photos over text of all the things that Grandma had accumulated over the years, and asking, do we want any of these things? Of course, the girls found some trinkets and stuff that they thought would be really cool to have, and so they were claiming them. And as I was looking at them, none of them actually reminded me of Grandpa or Grandma. So this morning I asked the girls, if you were to have anything from Grandpa's that would actually remind you of Great Grandpa, what would it be? Well, he being a pilot, the first answer was an airplane. I said, well, okay, I don't know how easy it's going to be for us to keep an airplane. Well, a model of an airplane then. Okay, maybe Grandpa has a model airplane that we could have. Another one answered, of course, great grandpa's train set, which I've explained before is like 12 feet long and 5 feet wide, and is an exact replica of his airport. And so he also has a track hanging above with an airplane hanging down that goes around, like when the train goes around, the airplane goes around. So again, I was like, I don't know that we can actually transport that from Pennsylvania to Kansas. Well, okay, maybe just one car then, all right? They wanted something, or they had the idea, and they were willing to kind of go small scale if it would help them remember great grandpa. So how do you remember the important people in your life? Do you have photos? Do you have items that used to belong to them, something they made by hand? Do you have specific memories that keep popping up? I'm really honestly not a trinket kind of a person, but I will hold on to things with function. So I've got one of my grandpa's old shirts that I wear occasionally. I've got my grandma's an old cast iron skillet of hers. What do you have? What do you hold on to that helps you remember? I also like when we get together and tell stories, when I'm with the family, to hear other people's perspectives on the same story. Sometimes I hear new things, but most of the time we're just, retelling the stories about Grandpa or about Grandma's dog or whatever those things were. And when we do this, we're remembering Grandpa, Grandma, we're remembering their house or the events, but we're also remembering. We are remaking ourselves as members of that family. That is who it is, what it means to be a part of this family is these memories that we have, these experiences, these people. We are remembering ourselves as a family. So in our worship time the last couple of weeks, we've been working through the narrative lectionary, meaning we're telling the stories from the beginning of the Bible, and we're going to go the whole way to the end of the Bible. But this week, I don't know if any of you noticed, we didn't actually hear a story. Bruce read a description of how to have a meal. Okay, that's not a story. God gives the instructions to the people of God about how they're supposed to tell the story. We don't get the story itself in a different year. The lectionary is over 4 different years, and so each year you get a different piece of these stories. So one of the other years we might hear the actual story of rescue. A lot of us have it in our minds, from the story of the Ten Commandments or from Prince of Egypt or something like that. We've got these images in our mind of the rescue, of going through the Red Sea, of the plagues. That's the story, but in this passage we're learning how the people are supposed to tell the story. So as the congregation of Israel is waiting to be rescued from slavery, God doesn't give them an airplane or a cast iron skillet or a book or a journal or a knickknack to remember. God gives them a meal. So when we look at the meal, I don't know how many of you were asking why while Bruce was reading, but it's interesting to note that there's a whole lot of explanation, a whole lot of descriptions about what the people are supposed to do, but very few explanations as to why. We don't know why in the story the lamb must be roasted but not boiled. We don't know why it has to be 1 year old. We don't know why there can't be any leftovers. We don't actually even know what the lamb's blood means. We just know that when it's painted over the doors, that is the sign to the people and to God that this is a house to be protected. We don't know why the people must eat the lamb with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. There was a lot of description about no yeast. Why? We're not told. Instead, we're told of the effects of the meal. So, God will pass over these homes, leaving them safe from the plague of the death of the firstborn. And the people will be ready to leave quickly. That's an effect of the meal as well. And finally, whenever they eat this meal in the future, they will be able to use it as an opportunity to retell the story of God rescuing them from slavery. Because the kids that didn't experience it are going to say, why are we doing this? What's up with this meal? It's almost baked into the meal that it's a meal with a little bit of mystery. The meal helps the congregation of Israel to remember God's saving act to rescue them from slavery and to remember themselves as the people who were rescued. To remember themselves, to become members again of this community that is rescued. So even today, the Passover meal is held as probably the most important ritual in Jewish life together. Every year, this Passover meal is held. It is the most important ritual. Some would argue this is the central story of the Bible. This is the moment, the primary moment, when Yahweh God reveals who he truly is. The one who hears the cries of the people in slavery, the one who came to their rescue, the one who turned the evil of oppression and violence and death back onto the oppressive empire of Egypt. So they eat the meal every year, mostly as instructed in this passage. They've taken away a couple things, added a few things, but it's the same basic idea. They don't have lamb at their meals in today's Passover meal, but they have something bitter like horseradish. And they'll take like a horseradish paste and they'll just eat a spoonful of horseradish paste as that bitter flavor. They have unleavened flatbread at the meal. They've added a few ceremonial steps like ceremonially washing hands and food and drinking wine. And all of these things, as they're done, lead to this inevitable question, and it's actually written in their Passover book, where a child must ask the question, why? Why is tonight any different than any other night? What is so special about this meal? Why are we doing this? It's written in the book, and the book gets handed to a kid, and the kid has to ask, why is this being done? Then the story is told. The story of rescue is told along with some of the explanations about what's going on. The flatbread is unleavened. It has no yeast in it. It represents being ready quickly because they didn't have time to wait for the yeast to do its work and rise the dough. If you remember when, as Bruce was reading, they're supposed to eat the meal with their sandals tied on and their garments ready to leave. This is a meal of anticipation. They're ready to go at a moment's notice. They're ready and waiting for God's rescue. So the bread is the quickest and easiest type of bread that can be made. They, in their meal, have a time when they break the bread apart in two. And in that time, that is a reminder of the seas being parted. The sea being parted and the rescued people going through on dry land. When they eat the horseradish and it's bitter in their mouths, it represents the bitterness of their poverty and their slavery. The rescue doesn't mean anything except that it came in the context of bitter life. Poverty and slavery and death. So they need to be reminded of what they came out of. And they drink wine, which signifies the celebration of their salvation. The celebration and thanksgiving and the partying that happens when you are pulled from a life of poverty and slavery into a life of freedom and liberty and peace. So it's a meal that engages all of our senses. And I get the sense that's what God had in mind, to engage all of our senses. Science has shown us how tightly our memories are connected to our senses like smell and taste. So if you ask me to remember something about my grandma, I probably will think of something that engages my body more than just like the visual memory I have. So I will remember the smells of the kitchen, or I'll remember singing with family. I'll remember the two of us sitting down on either sides of the Monopoly board for an hour and a half. Using our bodies in a ritual meal is extremely memorable and engages the wonder of children who want to know why. The meal helps us to remember and remember ourselves and who we are part of. That's why it's always done in groups. No individual can celebrate the Passover by themselves. No matter how distant they are from that great moment of rescue thousands of years ago, every time they take that meal, they are reminding themselves, they're remembering that they are part of that community that trusts God to rescue them. They're claiming to be part of that story that God will rescue God's people in every age. And then they move into the future as those people, shaped by that story. That's the central story of rescue. So they move into a life then of gratitude, a life of expectation, a life of joy, a life of working with God to rescue others. And so this is the meal, this is the story that is right in the middle and at the heart of Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. Jesus saw his work, his salvation, as the fulfillment of this Passover meal. So he sat at the table, looked at the elements, and reinterpreted them with himself at the center of that story. So he said, "This bread is my body. This wine is the blood of the new covenant poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." We might ask, what? I'm sure the disciples asked, what? But guess what? Jesus didn't really give an answer. That's all the explanation he gave. This is my body, this is my blood poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. It's a mystery that we are drawn into. Just like Yahweh did for the congregation of Israel, when Jesus wanted his disciples to understand and remember his salvation, he didn't write a theology book. He didn't draw them a picture. He gave them a meal. That was how he wanted to explain what his salvation was. And we Christians through the centuries have pored over what it means and written volumes and volumes about what it means. And maybe we've missed the point. Certainly not our Catholic brothers and sisters who celebrate this every week and for whom this is the center of their life together, is this encounter with Jesus. But we ourselves, Mennonites, may have forgotten because we wanted to make sure that we got the words right or got the theology just right and forgot that this was something simply to receive. So as we continue to gather for the meal, I invite us to remember and remember. This isn't something that is just an exercise of our brain. This is an exercise of a community that is both this gathered body here and Christians all around the world. We are remembering ourselves as the people of God's rescue. In the bread, we remember that Jesus went through death and rose to new life. So his body is the source of abundant and eternal life for us all. In the juice, we remember God's forgiveness and protection from the consequences of sin, which are deadly. And we don't do this by ourselves. All of us who have given our allegiance to Jesus alone, all of us who have followed him through baptism, we gather for the meal not only to remember his salvation, but to remember ourselves as the community of faith, the community of God's rescue. We remember our commitments to Jesus and to each other. We remember ourselves in God's family, far above any other family or team or club or political party. We gather at the meal to engage our senses, to remember more deeply and to encourage this wonder. So, brothers and sisters, may we keep remembering the story and telling the story and living the story of God's rescue of the congregation of Israel, God's rescue of all of humanity and the whole world. May we remember ourselves as God's children. Amen.